Welcome to the Thoughtcast. This is the in-depth section of the In Response podcast where handsome guys chat about exclusive topics with outstanding guests of the field. This show is brought to you by greatness at anycost.com and Austrian-legacy.com. You can support this show at patreon.com/response_legacy. Now lean back and enjoy.
Hello everyone and welcome to the third podcast of In Response, a legacy podcast. This is our section where we talk in depth about our favorite topics. And so this episode is called Brewer's Kitchen. I'm Philipp Klein, your host, and with me this time from across the Great Pond, Nathan Golia. Hi Nathan, how are you today?
Very good, Philip. Thank you for having me on, and great job on the name.
Yeah, like I said beforehand in the pre-talk, that was my idea when I was taking a shower today, so it wasn't as easy to come up with a good name here. But as the name suggests, we are talking about brewing today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you having me on to talk about this. I only wish I had some more successful brews in my history to talk about, but we could have some fun still talking about how to approach it.
Yeah, that's maybe the number one reason to brew is fun, and especially in a long-standing format like legacy. Yep. It's easy to get caught up in playing the same things and doing the same strategics all the time again. So at first, would be great if you could introduce yourselves to our listeners. Maybe not everyone knows you, so
I would assume almost no one knows. Yeah. So I've been playing Magic for quite a long time. I'm almost 40, and I've been around pretty much since the start with a long break in the middle. A while ago, when I came back to the game, I would say around 2010, 2011. So it's been I've been playing longer now than I did the first time, which is pretty funny.
That's the same for me too.
For several years, I was co-host of the Eternal Durdles podcast with Zach Clark and Phil Bleckman. I had a lot of fun doing that. I did it for, I want to say, 5 years. But some things in my life changed, and I didn't really, want to do the podcast much anymore. But I still love to check in with Legacy and play, especially when I see a card. I mean, they put out so many cards. There's always something that I see that I'm like, oh, that's going to get me to build a deck and play in a league, a couple of leagues with it, just to see if I can get it to work. That's sort of my relationship with the game now. I also, I do some work when I can with our local. We have a proxy vintage play group called Romancing the Stones here in Austin, Texas. And so I try and help out with the tournaments and stuff when I have time. My friend Stu runs them and really does an insane job of keeping everyone together. We're actually in the middle of a middle school format league that is finishing up tonight. Next up will be vintage, and we'll be playing. We play a lot of proxy vintage and Eternal Magic of all kinds here in Austin. So that's what I'm up to now.
Wow, that certainly looks great to hear. And yeah, is vintage actually very different to brew around than Legacy, or?
It actually is. I don't want to talk too much about it because I know people want to talk about Legacy, but I'll just say that it is very different to brew in Vintage and Legacy. And so when I started doing the Vintage tournaments, I would just play a lot of stock lists. But eventually, the best performing lists I ever had were brews I would come up with once I sort of understood the texture of Vintage a little bit more, and really what you could do to attack what people are generally doing in Vintage. And I think that is like really one of the things that I like to do in Legacy and why I'm drawn to brewing in Legacy. It's my antipathy towards mirror matches. I don't like playing mirror matches. And like, so the best way to guarantee you're not going to play a mirror match is to play something that no one in their right mind would play. And so like you definitely find that's how I sort of found myself to being like more of a brewer, because I like trying to solve the puzzle of the sort of established metagame.
So yeah, that's one side of the appeal of brewing. For me, what I also really love about brewing is the face of your opponent when you just start with something very unexpected or something off the wall that they don't recognize. Like when you brewed up your, I think it was a Ox of Aegon's Madness build that you first had. And I brought it to our LGS, and I started with Tropical Island into Kefelstad, and they were all always just, what the fuck is going on? And this kind of reaction always makes my heart jump, and is really like the most fun that I can have is probably in Legacy. So this for me is one of the biggest appeals to brew around in our format.
Yeah, did you want to talk about a little bit like defining a brew?
Yeah, that's probably a good topic here.
I forget who it is, but there's a post that sometimes gets resurfaced where it's like Legacy players will add one card to Delver and say I brewed a new deck.
Yeah, that's
which I think is very funny because that is very true. In a way, and I think that part of it is that people do love to play with new cards. They want to play with their cards, and when you have like, same deck. I mean, not that there's obviously some appeal to playing the same deck for a long time, and that's part of. And there is like definitely a section of the player base that does that. But I do think that people like to just see if things work, and so everyone has that little bit of like tendency to want to brew. But it is hard because you're going to take lumps. Like you are going to lose because you're learning to play against your deck, and you're also learning if your deck is even powerful enough. And I think that really sort of dissuades people from doing sort of wholesale brewing. But like, I think that it's rewarding to do well with one for that reason. Because like, yeah, like there's tuning and metagaming and trying to like fix established lists. And then there's, I generally look at brews in sort of two categories. One is sort of what I was saying before, where it's like, is there a group of cards that's sort of orthogonal to the metagame that I think would give me an advantage that people are not prepared to play against? And an example of that would be that the card Baleful Mastery, which is a black removal spell that exiles a creature or planeswalker, but if you pay it costs 3 and a black, but if you pay 1 and a black, your opponent draws a card. I've been big on that card because I was like, a lot of people are playing Merit Lage or Thassa's Oracle or Uro. Here's a way to get rid of all those creatures that has some sort of upside either way, right?
Yeah,
so like
because you don't have exile removal in these colors normally.
Right. So you don't have to, yes, right, exactly. And like if you're looking for a way to exile a creature in black, here's a card that if it'll hit a Dark Depths, and yeah, they get a card, but it's 2 for 2 because they've used Dark Depths with either Thespian Stage or Vampire Hexmage. So you're only even on cards. Against Thassa's Oracle, if their library is empty, they just lose, and that was actually a way I used it yesterday.
Yeah, I saw your
yeah,
tweet.
It was very fun. I was like, that's exactly right. Very funny. And that's the other thing. It's very funny when it works. And against Uro, like, yeah, paying 3 and a black to exile a creature sucks, but it's better than getting hit by an Uro, And like people just aren't expecting it. They'll tap out to play their Uro. They might not be able to have. They might not have. They don't have counter magic or Veil of Summer. You got a 4 mana instant, and you just go to wipe it out and go to your turn, and that's sort of how I think, about like, well, here's a card that no one's expecting and not going to play around. How do I build a deck around it? Or here's a group of cards that are like that. The other thing is, of course, to see something and be like, that's busted, I have to play it. I have to at least see if I can get this thing to work, right?
Yeah.
And the example that I've had most recently with that was when they printed the card Abundant Harvest, and I realized that, like, oh, if your whole deck is if your only land in your deck is Gaia's Cradle, you'll always get Gaia's Cradle. And, like, what can you do with that? And so for a while, I was just playing, like, Spirit Guide, Abundant Harvest, Gaia's Cradle with Kobolds, and then, like, Glimpse of Nature to try and just, like, beat people quickly with something like a Craterhoof Behemoth. And that was more hit or miss. But it was, of course, extremely fun. But, like, I noticed in the decks that you sent that there's, like, you have a mix of those sort of approaches when you're doing brewing, right? You're like, oh, this is just busted, I should do it, versus like, I don't think people are prepared for this strategy.
Yeah, that's basically, we're kind of the same side here. When I'm going to brewing, I most of the time have an idea stuck in my head, like, how do I get, for example, black, white, red midrange to work in this meta game, and I just brew around and always trying to get this to work. Or like you said, I have a busted thing that I want to use, like the Calibrated Blast.
Calibrated Blast, yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. And also I tried it for some games, and sometimes it works. It's like your Glimpse of Nature with the Abundant Harvest. Sometimes it just works, and then you have really the time of your life.
Yeah, right. It is definitely, that's the thing. Like, yeah, like, what's your objective? And, like, maybe I'm not gonna try and win a tournament with this, but, like, I could 5-0 a league or 4-0 my weekly or whatever it is for sure. Or I could even go 2-2, and if I get to do it, I'll have fun. There have been many times where I would take a brew to the Legacy Weekly and, like, win the first game, and my deck would operate perfectly, and then I'd lose 8 games in a row and go home, but I'd be thinking about that first game the whole time. Like, oh, I definitely got it to work once, and that's all that I needed.
Yeah, that's definitely true. For me, that was what sometimes happens is, I bring my brew to a tournament, and I tune it against the meta game, and then I get just stomped in the first 2 rounds by just some things that I hadn't considered, like Belcher or Dredge or Reanimate or tier 2 to tier 3 decks that I hadn't had in my equation.
Just thinking about, like, you had a tokens deck on your list of things that you've been working on, and, like, what happens every time you do something like that, the first thing that happens is, like, you get paired against lands round 1, and they just play Tabernacle naturally from their hand. Like, that's the kind of stuff that happens when you're playing a brew sometimes, where you're like, that's the one card I could not beat, or, like, I really can't, like, let it sit and play. And of course they, like, naturally draw it in the first game, but that happens. And, like, those things, more and more I'm, able to shrug them off and, like, sort of laugh at it,
Yeah, and you don't need to get disencouraged.
Yeah.
Just because this happens. So we are already deep in the pros and cons of brewing. So what do you think are other pros and cons of brews in the meta?
I think that, like, this is not a great pro, but sometimes a deck just looks nice to see other cards. You and I have sort of bonded over our love of the black, white, and red mid-range decks because they just kind of look nice. You get kind of sick of looking at the same sort of, like, art and like color scheme of, like, oh, everything's blue and then something else, right? It's just nice to see something different. That's not, like, a great pro. I mean, like, I think the pros are pretty much just, like, you're either going to be rewarded for making a great call and understanding the legacy in that moment, where you're like, yeah, man, I knew exactly what people were weak to, I brought it, and I got to the finals or something, right? Or you're gonna find something that's extremely busted, and for all you're gonna be the next sort of sensational deck builder because you've done that. I mean, I can't say I've had that happen, but you know, it is something that's like, I remember like the first few times I played that Cobalt Cradle deck, I was like, this is so broken. What if I just like ruined everyone's experience in Legacy? Because now like people are going to be incentivized to do this. But then people caught on to it, so it didn't really work. But definitely there's some. I mean, what's that turtle card? The like someone had to decide to try and play that. You know, that's kind of a clunky, weirdo looking card, and now it's, you know, public enemy number
Kappa
one.
Cannoneer.
Kappa Cannoneer, yeah. So.
And now it's a mainstay in the 8th cast.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess the pros. I mean, the cons are just like what we said. Like you're gonna lose. You're just, sometimes it's not gonna work, you know, or you're gonna hit a bad matchup or something you didn't expect. But
yeah, sometimes.
Or sometimes you're gonna win a game and like really have no business winning it, and then you're gonna think that it's a good matchup for your brew, and then the next 5 or 6 times you play against that deck, you realize that you were just lucky the first time.
But the opposite also happens. Back in 2000 and when was Grand Prix Birmingham? I think 2016. There I played that guy Ale, and I thought I was so much behind versus Atlassian Tendrils. Because I lost I played always against Daniel and our locals, and I lost the first two FNMs to him in the second round, and I just said, this matchup is unwinnable. I simply can't beat it. But then you understand the nuances of the matchup, and suddenly the whole dynamic changes, and it becomes a 70-30 matchup for you. So this can also happen. The problem with brews is often that people just dismiss it too soon and don't put enough work to learn the intricacies of the deck.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's, you know, because it can be discouraging, and also it's costly if you're like, you know, trying to grind leagues and test your deck, and you're going 2-3 and 3-2 at best, you know, for a bunch of time. You're gonna kind of run out of resources and have to move on.
Especially on MTGO, yeah,
right.
That's true.
Which is where, you know, a lot of people are, you know, playing right now because, you know, that's kind of how it is. In fact, there's a brew I want to try that I haven't been able to try because they haven't put the card on MTGO yet. And I'm always thinking, like, I got to bring it to the weeklies around here. And they just are kind of always stopping and starting, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the interesting point that you made about, you know, playing against, you know, your perception of the matchup between Dead Guy Ale and Ant is that, like, yeah, like if you're playing against someone who knows you and knows what you're up to an extent, you know, they're at an advantage. But with a brew, a lot of the time you're showing up, you have the information advantage because you have thought about the matchup and the other person has not for a second thought about the matchup.
Yeah.
And that's the thing where it's like, yeah, like I had a plan. That Baleful Mastery that I had last night, I'm sure my opponent was shocked, but that was the plan. You know, it was part of my, like, okay, I need 6 cards for this matchup, and like that's why I needed that card to cut across all these different matchups, because there's only 15 cards in your sideboard. You need 6 for this matchup, and you need 5 for this matchup, and you have to have crossover. And when you have that, you know, when you're thinking holistically about the format, which I think is in the nature of the brewer, to just be like, yeah, I'm always thinking, like, this is what I'm seeing, what am I responding to? That's the kind of advantage you have. And you get the practice, and like, yeah, the person you're practicing against is going to learn you a little bit, but you're not going to play against that person the next, you know, in the tournament or whatever. So
yeah, that's true. That's also why it's sometimes a little bit hard to test for tournaments with your friends, because they always say, why should I test versus you? Because I won't run into decks like yours in the tournament.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in a paper tournament, you're liable to run into anything, though, especially in the first couple rounds.
Oh yeah, if you don't have buys.
It's very funny. Like sometimes someone will say, like, I can't believe I ran into this card, and I'll be like, have you ever like walked around the first round of a Legacy Grand Prix or a big Legacy tournament? You're gonna see cards you can't imagine. Or even sometimes in the late round, someone's gone on a run. I remember a while ago, this was during when dig through time was legal. I just remember that's how long ago it was. But I do remember like walking around a table and then seeing someone with like a chalice on 5 and trying to figure out what happened. And I realized they were playing like Metalworker, which, you know, is not a card that you see very much, or had, even at that point had kind of fallen out of favor. But they had put a chalice on 5 so that their opponent couldn't force of will their stuff, which means they had to make 10 mana, you know, in the first place. So like, you know, I mean, like that's the thing that, you know, the idea that like you shouldn't test. It's good for other people to test against a brew too, because it does keep you. It helps develop their skills in terms of adapting to situations that you might not expect and thinking about, you know, why am I having trouble with this, or why do I think this is easy right now? You know, what are the current conditions that we're operating under? So you know, I think that, you know, it's good to have someone. I think it's good to want to be that person who's you know, sort of working with people. You know, it's also interesting too because like if you were to play like sort of what I would consider like a, you know, like you said, like a tier 3 deck. I don't know what's a good example of that right now. Maybe something like Food Chain. Like, yeah, like that's somewhat
or Allure.
Or Allure. Yeah, what are those decks? Because they're very interchangeable in terms of like who's going to play that. Well, the kind of person who wants to resolve a green enchantment. You know, there's not a lot of those people, right? But anyway, Food Chain was fairly popular for a while when I lived in Utah, and it would be like a quarter of the meta. You know, and I had so I knew like, I mean, we're talking like 3 out of 12 people, but like yeah, I knew the Food Chain matchup inside and out, and then like you'd fly across the country to play the Grand Prix, and you'd play against Food Chain. Like, sorry man, I have tech for this, I have an idea, I have an approach. And like, you know, I know what I'm like, you're not catching me off guard. I saw this card get like you tried to resolve this. There's no way. I know that's the bad card, you know. So you know, that goes both ways.
Yeah, definitely. So playing against Brews and playing with Brews will definitely help you in the first few rounds of the bigger tournament. Probably only in paper, but yeah, that's the place where these things usually happen. Mm-hmm. So next we can talk about our approach to deck building and brewing around in our favorite format in Legacy.
Yep.
So we already called it a little bit in the beginning. So what's your approach to deck building? How do you start if you see a busted thing,
yeah,
or just some strategy that you wanna build around? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? How do you build your core, or in which archetype do you lean most of the time?
Right. So, I think that I'm just going to talk about the last deck that I kind of brewed a little bit and go through the process with that, because I think that's just kind of the best way to illustrate this process. And that was what I was talking about. The deck I was playing is like a Jund mid-range deck, like just straight up red, green, and black. And the reason I wanted to,
Jund.
Yeah, good old Jund, right? But of course, Jund has lost a number of things, most notably Deathrite Shaman. But like the conditions that I was starting from was that Ragavan was banned, and the thing that had kept what I thought was the reason I thought Jund was having trouble as an idea conceptually was that Jund does want to play cards like Thoughtseize, Abrupt Decay, Lightning Bolt, and when those get hit by a Ragavan and then turned on you, you're in big trouble, right? So you just can't. You don't want them to like get in with the Ragavan, flip your Thoughtseize your answer. Like, that's not good. You're just way behind. So I was like, finally, we can play. We have unlocked Thoughtseize as a card that we can play. The next thing I looked at was like, well, what else? What has Jund gotten in this time period while it was unplayable? And I think the number one thing, if you think about red, green, and black, the biggest, other than Ragavan, of course, the biggest news in red, green, and black was Dragon's Rage Channeler.
Oh yeah,
Dragon's Rage
also in my brews all the time now.
Yeah, right. Dragon's Rage Channeler, Well, what does Dragon Rage Chandler want you to do? It wants you to achieve Threshold. Or not Threshold, Delirium. My apologies. It wants you to achieve Delirium. What else can you do in red, green, and black that's good with Delirium? And that was where I remembered the card Traverse the Ulvenwald, which is 1 green for a card that either lets you search for a basic land, but if you have Delirium, it searches for any land or any creature. And if we're trying to hit Delirium anyway, so we're going to be playing things like Mishra's Bauble in our deck, right? This card is an insane cheap. It's a 1-mana tutor late in the game for anything, or for anything, for a lot of things that are cool. Well, we're also playing a lot of. So now we're playing a deck that's got Dragon's Rage Channeler, Mishra's Bauble, Traverse the Ulvenwald, Thoughtseize. That's like, well, let's get our Tarmogoyfs back. We're gonna have a lot of card types in the graveyard. This is going to be a nice card for us, and we can trim. We don't have to play forward them because we can find them with our Traverse the Ulvenwalds. And then you fill in from there. We need some removals, so we'll get some bolts, some Erupt Decays. We want some utility creatures. Look at all the utility creatures we've got out there. We've got that have been printed. Things like Opposition Agent, Dauthi Voidwalker, Scavenging Ooze, which is a great mainstay. These are all things that you can now run because you've got a tutor that can find any of them. And your deck sort of just kind of comes together around that idea of, well, the question is, why should I play this over any other deck? To me, the answer was, I want to play 4 Pyroblast, because so much of what's going on in Legacy is Kappa Cannoneer, or Echo of Eons, or Murktide Regent. And don't you just want to have the 1-mana answer to all those guys right there? And there it is, right? So now, like, it is a brew. It's cards that are not played in this combination very often together, and you're gonna have some sort of like things that people aren't expecting to see, like Traverse the Ulvenwald or Dauthi Voidwalker off of that, and people are not gonna be prepared to play against it. And that's sort of how you talk about going from like a concept into a draft and then sort of refining it. And then from there, it's like, well, what are the other, what are some of the matchups? How do they go? And that's where the play. Obviously, you're playing it to come in, but that was sort of how I went through the process from like the idea of like, I can play Thoughtseize again, and I want to play Pyroblast. What can I build around with those cards that really attacks what people are doing?
Oh yeah. Now for my approach, I just will use the Bird Alive deck that you probably have seen.
Yep.
Yeah. For explanation, here in this deck, I will put our decks into the show notes, and then you can take a look at them. For a long time, I wanted to play Bird Alive in a kind of fair or mid-rangey way, because I simply hate the fact that outside of Phoenix decks, the Bird Alive is often bad, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to be the next Bird Alive after the first one, or the second or the third Bird Alive aren't dead draws. Mm-hmm. So you don't have so much air in it. And for this, I brewed up a blue. It's a blue-black Bird Alive deck, where you can turn one Bird Alive into Bloodghast, or in 3 Bloodghasts, or Bird Alive turn 1 into 2 Prized Amalgam and Narcomoeba, where you get your Prized Amalgams back. And this all backed up by the almighty Cantrip Cartel with Brainstorm Ponder, Phases, Force of Wills, and also Careful Studies.
Yep.
So my approach here was, like I said beforehand, to just jam Bird Alive into a more mid-rangey and into a shell that is more like Delver, with a graveyard sub theme. And the reason the things that I tried here with this deck is also in the sideboard to have a transformational sideboard into Doomsday. because the main deck just loses versus Graveyard Hate, which Doomsday simply dodges.
So you were looking to build right around the card, right? Buried Alive.
I'm looking to build right around the card, yeah.
Because it's cool. That's why people brew, because like I never get to play Buried Alive. It's such a cool card. It's got an awesome name, and like
and I always thought that there has to be a way to just make this good, even when you're not comboing off with it right now.
Yeah.
Because if you just put 3 creatures in the yard, there's so much that you can do with it.
Yeah. I think for a long time, Buried Alive was played as a combo piece with Necrotic Ooze, where you'd have to get the Necrotic Ooze out with Reanimate, and then you had other cards in the graveyard that we'd win with. And then, of course, that was just sort of supplanted by a Grizzlebrand being printed.
Yeah.
Then they printed Grizzlebrand. Yeah. Oh, that sucks. Well, and then of course, what I liked about your deck was that you had like a number of interesting plans. Like the one Narcomoeba, like a lot of people don't realize the Narcomoeba prized amalgam thing. In fact, by the way, you could Buried Alive for 3 Narcomoebas. They go right into play, which is pretty cool. But prized amalgam, that's a big body that comes out of the graveyard there, and you don't have to have that third spell, which I think with the Phoenix decks that was always not always a problem, as much as it's just like you had a very idea of like, oh, I've got almost everything except that last part, and so you'd wait a turn, and then that turn would turn on your opponent's ability to play something like Spell Pierce. Not that people play Spell Pierce anymore, but at the time that was the thing that you would. Then you have to start playing around more stuff. Whereas this, it's like you have a turn 1 Buried Alive for something every turn, right? If you think you're going to get to untap and play your next land, you could get your Bloodghasts. And if you think that the pressure is more important, you get the Narcomoeba and prized amalgams, which I think is which is good. And I like the Wonder. So I'm assuming one of these packages has something to do with Wonder and Hogak, just like playing
flying Hogak, yeah.
Playing like a flying Hogak, which is pretty brutal. Flying Bloodghast, also very brutal. Wonder is a cool card, so yeah.
Yeah, people underestimate the aggressiveness of Bloodghasts, especially when they're coming turn 2.
Yep. A thing that I liked, another thing about this deck that I found interesting is like a lot of people don't like Thassa's Oracle. I actually really like Thassa's Oracle. I think it's awesome that it exists because
me too.
Because it's one of those things where it's like you find a thing that like, you have a way like, oh, this mills my whole graveyard or my whole library, or this I can do this thing which exiles my library, but then like I gotta win with this convoluted way of trying to win. It's nice that Thassa's Oracle is pretty compact. The first thing I played it with was the card Tainted Pact, where I was like, now I can play Tainted Pact and I can just have a I win button in it, instead of trying to like navigate my weird maze of one-ofs into some sort of winning game. Now I get to play like this cool card that lets you go through your whole deck and find just what you want, and worst comes to worst, I just use it to win. And I mean, I know Doomsday is a little bit of a boogeyman right now to people, but I'm telling you, man, I don't know. I'm 4-0 against it with Jund in 30 matches. I think I've played 30 matches with the Jund deck. I just keep winning. They keep casting Doomsday, and I keep killing them. And the next turn,
keep playing Baleful Mastery.
Baleful Mastery, yeah, or just Thoughtseize, and then they're like, oh, whoops. I guess I can't win now because that was the card I needed next turn. It's very interesting. Like, people just think like, oh, this card resolves, and they know exactly how to win. And that's because if you're playing something that they know how to win against, they're setting up that way. But sometimes they're just not ready to beat that Thoughtseize, or they didn't put Cavern of Souls in the pile and you Pyroblast their Thassa's Oracle, or you Pyroblast their
the Ideas Unbound.
Yes, Ideas Unbound. And what's the other one where you draw 2 cards from the graveyard?
Deep analysis.
Deep analysis, yeah. Or you bolt them in response to that, by the way. Another way you can win. Just like people are not thinking about how to beat Doomsday that way. They're so focused on not letting Doomsday resolve, and then they're playing 4 Force of Will and all these Force negations and Flusterstorms. The Doomsday player just finds a way to stop their stuff from being countered and wins. But like, if you're just going to try and, if you're going to, find a way to beat them otherwise, they're not necessarily prepared for it. And that's not to criticize anyone who's listening to this and playing Doomsday. I'm not saying that all Doomsday players are myopic about everything. I'm just saying that that's not what they expect to see. And sometimes you can, if you're using a brew, get through on them. Or if you're playing a card like Dark Ritual, Doomsday's in that nice little compact package now that you can board right in.
Yeah. That's also the reason why I made the transformational sideboard, because the shell is basically almost the same. You've got the Daces, the Forces, the Brainstorms, the Ponders, and the Dark Rituals. It's easy to just slot the 8 cards from Doomsday right in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a lot of things with Brews too, a thing that maybe we should have mentioned in pros is that sometimes you kind of just know that you can't do your thing, and so you have your ability to transform a little bit, and you can kind of build that into the brewing process.
Yeah, that's definitely true, yeah. So, we are talking already a little bit about the decks. So, from a concept of our deck to the first draft, we had already, I think, talked a little bit about it in your example. So, can we just summarize it here?
Yeah, I think that, like, the way, once you have your concept, you realize, like, there's sort of givens in every deck, right? Like, you need some amount of mana sources, you need some amount of defense.
Not always.
Not all. Well, that's why I said mana sources and not lands, of course. But like, you're gonna have, like, you're gonna find your things that work, and you're good, and like cards will lead to other cards. That was sort of my point about the Dragon's Rage Channeler leading to Traverse the Elven Wall, which led me to like having this sort of creature toolbox in my deck. I think that's kind of how those things just they'll move themselves along pretty well. And a thing that I learned, and I would definitely encourage you to take notes, because when you're making a deck and you're like, okay, there's 2 paths I can go down here. You pick one, you will always forget the second one, and you'll want to go back to it. You can't quite remember. You take some notes if you're serious about getting it to work. And I think that, if you're willing to commit a little bit of time and resources, you'll surprise yourself with how well your brew does. I can't stop playing this Jund deck, Philip. I can't stop because I keep winning. I was trying to warm up for this podcast last night, and I like blink and I'm 4-0 in a league. I lost the last round, which sucked. I was kind of hoping to come with a 5-0, but I'm like 4-0. Just like, yeah, like this. I'm like, oh my God, I think this is good. How do I keep winning with this deck? And it's,
you gotta make the 5-0.
I know.
I want to see the list in the Reddit.
That's why I was so upset when I lost in the last round to Delver. I lost the die roll, and then I got like run over in the first game, and then of course I was just behind by a game, which sucked. But I was like, I was so close to getting this list posted and having people tell me how they're right about how terrible it is online.
Yeah, that's always what happens. It's just a 5-0. It doesn't mean anything, but people don't see how much sweat and tears run into it.
Yeah, yeah, I think you'll be surprised if you like really commit and go through a process and think about the format, how you'll have success, and it'll be rewarding.
Definitely. So, and the next section, how do you evaluate the cards for the decks? Are there some auto includes, or do you have pet cards, so fancy one-offs that you always try to run? And what are some traps that people fall into when they are brewing?
So yeah, you wrote on the notes like auto includes, traps, what to run, and fancy one-ofs. And I think that the biggest trap is the fancy one-of.
That's true. That's
unless you're like very specifically building around a tutor effect, if you're like, oh, like this card will bail me out if this happens in this process, like I'm going to put one of them in. Like really, most brews should be quad laser. In fact, I looked at a lot of your brews, and that was what I noticed. Like the tokens deck, it's like 4 of this, 4 of this, 4 of this, 3 of this, 4 of this, 4 of this, 2 of this, 2 of that. Like you've got all the multiples in there, right? Same thing with your buried. No, your Buried Alive deck has a couple of 1-ofs because Buried Alive is a tutor, but you're like, you've got your major cards as 4-ofs. I think that is actually, I think a lot of people think of brews as like a thing where people are just throwing junk cards together. And it's not. It's more about a concept. And usually that concept is like, I could put 4 of this card in, or this card gives me 8 of an effect that I only had 4 of before, and I'm going to get more consistency on it. I think the biggest example of that is when they printed Blazing Rootwalla. Like,
oh yeah, my gosh, madness was it?
Yeah,
now a deck,
and it's basically because like once you get that extra set of openers, like your deck is insane. I mean, you talked about like playing the first versions of the Hollow Vine decks that I was working on a little bit, and like I always wanted more Basking Rootwallas. They just didn't exist. I was playing Ornithopter. Like, I would play like an Ornithopter as my 5th Rootwalla, like talking about fancy 1-ofs. Just because like I wanted something else that was free for the first turn. But yeah, I auto includes. It's interesting about what auto includes because usually you're building something because you really want to play a card like you were talking about Buried Alive or Calibrated Blast. And my biggest hole I think is I have auto excludes. Like I don't like playing with the card Urza's Saga. And every time I'm making a brew and I'm like, oh, this deck needs Urza's Saga, I'll go like, forget it. I don't want to play Urza's Saga, and I'll move on to something else. No one should do that. That is because that is not a good thing. I'm not advising that. So I'm interested in your perception of like how you evaluate cards then.
I think the fancy 1-offs are also traps, unless you, like you said, have tutors like Greens and Zenith, if you're more a toolboxy style deck. Mm-hmm. And also the traps are probably kind of the same. I mean, you really summarized it very well. Also, the fact with the quad laser build, because when you're brewing at first, you want to make sure how the cards work together, and then you have to draw them as often as possible, or in conjunction with the other cards, and so you can't rely on your 1-offs. And also, when I want to try a card as a one that would be a 1-off, I make sure that I put at least 2 copies in it. Because the first one probably gets countered, or something like that, and just discarded. It's like with the red-white tokens deck with the heroic. How is it called?
Heroic reinforcements.
Yeah, heroic reinforcements. Like you said in the beginning, I played versus lands yesterday. I played a league and I went 2-3, and I had very horrible matchups. But I won one match versus lands where he had turned 2 Tabernacle in both games, and I won just on the backbone of heroic reinforcements, because he can just put so much damage through. And I know it's a 4 CMC, it's a 4-drop. So cards like 4-drops are always here to win the game on the spot.
Right.
So that's one of the basic principles, I think, in legacy deck building, is that the 2 mana or the 2 CMC drops are always there to bring you ahead, and the 4 CMC drops are there to seal the deal.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that is something like I would love to play more cards in Legacy, right? But you're 100% right. Like if you're looking at a 4-drop and like I want to get this card into play, the question is like if you get this card into play, how many turns do you expect to play after that? And if you're thinking that like you're going to be playing that for another 10 turns, and your opponent shouldn't be conceding, because obviously people don't always concede. it's like Jace the Mind Sculptor, right? Like, Jace the Mind Sculptor hits play. You've got like a turn to figure it out. And if you don't, you might play another 10 turns, but you've already lost, right? And I think that that's the thing with like you said, like a 4-drop, like especially this card, which is really cool, like giving all your tokens +1/+1 in haste. Like it's one, knowing that card is going. You want that to, when you have a board presence, so you can just kind of win the game that turn. You're gonna just go nuts. And the other thing is to, like, you have to be able to let go of it if you think it's not going to be good. If you know it's not going to be good. So, for example, heroic reinforcements, probably don't want it against a deck playing Days. You probably don't want it against a deck that wins really fast, because you're never going to get there, right?
You never get to turn 4.
Yeah, right. Or if you've gotten to turn 4, you don't need the heroic if you're playing against whatever, like some sort of combo deck, and you get to turn 4, you probably don't need the heroic reinforcements to win, because you probably set up some sort of house of horrors that they can't beat anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
And you're gonna just close the door with your young pyromancer tokens, in a couple turns, and like things like that. So, I really liked that point that you made, because I think that like brewing isn't an excuse to do poor deck building. It's an excuse. It's a way to do fun deck building, and you still have to really evaluate every card, as harshly as you would if you were like going into a Grand Prix with a stock list and making sure you liked it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And people just always fall into, like you said, into the pit trap of, I love this card, I want to keep it in, and maybe it's good, but you just sometimes you have to, like I said, let it go, ward it out, or if the meta changes, find a substitute, find something else that works maybe slower but gets bigger, or is a little bit smaller and faster. So I think we have we are coming to the last section of our cast here. We are putting the drafts in our lists into the show notes. Do you have some ideas for the future that you wanna work on?
I definitely do. And I definitely, like, I haven't worked on this much yet, but it's one that I was so happy when you were wanted to do this, because I was like, I'm going to tell him about this, and I think you're going to like it. I really want to play Lion Sash with Dragon's Rage Channeler in some sort of black, white, and red deck. Because I just think it sounds so cool to strap like a Lion Sash with a bunch of counters on it onto a Dragon's Rage Channeler. And it's sort of gone the same way. I did try it once, and like the mana was really clunky, and I'm sort of trying to figure that out. I might not get to play black. It might have to be like a white and red thing. But like, when I think about, like, Dragon's Rage Channeler is like probably one of the best cards that's out there now. And it's, something that you don't have to just play in Delver. You can play in a bunch of other shells if you think about it. And I think Lion Sash is really solid. I mean, Scavenging Ooze is always good. This is a Scavenging Ooze you could find with Stoneforge Mystic, and it's one that if you have like a flying card, a flying creature, you can get in with all that damage a lot easier, right? You won't be running it into a wall. I mean, how many times have you had a Scavenging Ooze in play that's like an 8/8, and then right now, I mean, the big thing that's across the table from it is a 9/9 Urza Saga token,
Or a Murktide in 8/8.
Yeah, like a Murktide read. That's another great one. That was like, man, my Scavenging Ooze, I wish it had flying. I wish I had a Wonder in my graveyard, right? But like, yeah. I have been thinking about that, like, okay, so we got our Dragon's Rage Channeler, we'll have our Lion Sashes, which is a pretty good card because incidental graveyard hate is always going to be good in Legacy. And then you get Stoneforge Mystic, so you can tutor for it. Lion Sash, by the way, also being 2 card types is good for Dragon's Rage Channeler, because if you get one in the graveyard, whether it's via something like Faithless Looting or just via the Surveil, that's going to really help you achieve Delirium.
And you could also unearth the Lion Sash.
That's right. Ooh, I didn't think of that. There you go, though. See, now you're finding things that are coming together. Like that's the idea that I'm kind of working with a little bit, seeing if there's some sort of functional idea there to sort of attack how people are playing. Again, you get your access to Pyroblast, you get your access to incidental graveyard hate. and that's pretty cool. The other idea that I've been working on a lot is, and this is, have you read the card Jury, Master of the Review?
It's the one, the red and black one, and every time you sacrifice something, it deals damage?
Yes, every time you sacrifice something, you put a counter on it, and then when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So I was thinking about it, I was like, ooh, with Greater Gargadon, you can just sacrifice your whole board, and then you can sacrifice the Jury at the end. You get like a bunch of counters. Then I remembered that not only that, but you could pitch Greater Gargadon to Blazing Shoal and make Jury like a 10 or 11-1 or something. And then you could just sacrifice it to Cabal Therapy or something like that. I've been trying to get that together. That's one of those ideas where it's more like, I think this is really powerful if I can get it to work. The problem I've had has been getting it to work. The card that was printed recently...
I think this is the perfect deck also for Bird Alive and Bloodcast.
Yep, that's actually really good. I should try that. Also, I was thinking the new card that came out that I thought that brought me back to this idea was the Hidetsugu's Second Right, because
Hidetsugu consumes all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Consumes all. Because it'll clean up like a lot of like if you're behind, it'll clean up the board. It'll wipe out the graveyards for Uro and things like Uro and what's the other graveyard card that is now escaping me? Murktide Regent.
Murktide Regent.
It wipes that stuff out, and then because once it deals 10 damage, the opponent loses the game. So if you do attack with the other side and then Blazing Shoal it, you can just win. So I haven't quite gotten the numbers right in this card on this deck yet, but I do like it as an idea. So
you know the card Dreadhot Butcher?
Yes, that's the other. Yes.
Yeah.
I talked about like finding redundancy. Like Dreadhorde Butcher, I tried to get that to work already before they printed Jury, because I was like, this is so cool. This is going to be awesome. And then it never.
It's always a 2-for-1. It's
yeah. So you get redundancy on that effect. There's 3 cards now that when they die, they just dome their opponent for their total power. And of course, with a card like Blazing Shoal, or if I could dream playing a card like Hatred, basically just channel Fireball. That would be really great. But again, like haven't gotten the numbers on it right, but just I feel that there's something there.
Oh yeah, probably, and that's also one of the biggest pros of brewing, that there's always something buried, really buried in the thousands of cards or 10,000 of cards in Legacy that remains to be to be revealed. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I mean, Blazing Shoal is a ridiculous card. It's just a free +10/+0 in the right situation. Like, I'm surprised it's not played more. It was banned in Modern for a reason.
Yeah, that's true. I think maybe you could play Blazing Shoal in kind of a landfall deck instead of Berserk.
Yes,
with Berserk.
That's the thing. Like, I love Berserk. I've done a lot of that land. I've seen the Landfall Zoo pop up occasionally. I love to see that. I think those are so cool. That's another deck that benefited from getting more printings. It got the red step links, which you always get that step links. You get. I love it, man. Crop rotation, Berserk. The game's over. Like once you get it to work, it's so satisfying.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's like fetch land, crop rotation for another fetch land, Berserk, Bolt You. And then that's it. I got it.
And it's over.
It's over. But
if you wanna kill people with flying lion sashes bound to Dragonflight Channeler, I can just recommend you my Mardretti list.
Yeah, that was actually
That's basically something like that. It's blue. It's white, red midrange with a little bit of a splash of black, just for Directi in Genius Iconoclast.
Yes, I forgot that you had all those same cards in it. I would have played more Lion Slashes, but that's just me.
More Lion Slashes?
I just think the card's good. I just think there's so much incidental graveyard. The problem is getting access to a lot of white mana.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
There's no Gaia's Cradle in. I mean, there is, but it's for enchantments, which Lion's Sash, unfortunately, is not an enchantment artifact, creature, equipment, or whatever. Um, if it was, though, that would be incredible. If it was an enchantment, that'd be way too good.
Oh yeah, that's true. So for me, my ideas that are lingering in my head are now to push the red-white tokens list more into a Jeskai shell.
Mm-hmm.
Probably to strengthen out the weaknesses of it, but without leaving the path that I'm now on. So probably no force of will or something. Just stasis to compensate for the turn 2 young pyromancer that gets bolted.
Yeah.
So it needs some kind of protection actually, and also I was trying to build a deck around Eve, Progenitor Ooze, to make a kind of rule storm deck, which makes a huge Ooze army as soon as possible. So that's the things I'm working on right now. And
that was one of the finishers I tried to put in the Cobalt Cradle deck, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
Printed it, yeah. You can make a lot of oozes.
The ooze is loose.
Yeah, right.
Not just a scavenging ooze here. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I do have to hop off. I didn't even realize what time it was. I'm sorry. But yeah, no, I was glad to come on. I really appreciate you reaching out and talking about this. This is, really the kind of stuff that when I talk about Magic, this is the stuff I want to talk about all the time. Just like funny, there's like fun cards and cool ideas. Like, so much of it is like, how do you feel this is in this matchup? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, don't you want to play Progenitor Ooze? Don't you want to just make a bunch of oozes? But thanks so much.
There was a funny story in Rising from Daniel where he played versus Julian Knapp.
Mm-hmm.
And he went for the Progenitor Ooze, and Julian couldn't remove it because he had, I think, 2 prismatic endings in his hand, and the Ooze tokens are also CNC 5, so he couldn't kill it with his 4-color control list.
Yeah, can't Flusterstorm him either.
Yeah, that's true. Just Stifle, but who plays Stifle anymore?
Yeah, Stifle still got a 2/2. So,
yeah, that's true. Yeah. So for our listeners, if you like what we are doing, consider following us on Twitter. It's @response_legacy. You can find me on Twitter. It's @PhinnekMTG, PhinnekMTG. And Nathan, where can people find you on social media?
On Twitter @N_R_G.
Oh yeah, that's great. Also, you could follow Nathan's old buddies at Eternal Durdles on Twitter. They are doing a great job, and I just can't recommend them enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. They're keeping it going. They're doing really great stuff. They've been doing a lot of deck techs recently, as well. They've expanded into some video content. So definitely give them a follow. Follow all these podcasts and put $1 on Patreon if you can, because Legacy, there's
it's an expensive hobby.
It is expensive. If you can afford to put $1 in, you definitely should. But I guess what I was just gonna say is that Legacy is only as vital as the people who keep playing it, and it's good to make everyone make sure we all know where everyone is, so that we can come back and have good tournaments.
So that's great, and it was nice to have you on, Nathan, and we will surely see us again.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. In response, yeah.
This was In Response, a Legacy podcast. If you enjoyed the ride, feel free to support the show by following, leaving a review, or subscribe on patreon.com/response_legacy.